Alright, so I'm Keenan, Kugler, Jacob Lincoln. For our final project, we made a crane game. It's version 1.02 because we had a failed version in the beginning that we'll get to.
So for the requirements, we were to implement a crane that works using 3 servos. The servo should allow for 2-axis movement, as well as the cable movement dropping up and down. The servos are used, we use the buttons and the switches on the development board in order to move the servos. And intentionally we use the microcontroller, but we'll talk about that later. And then we put in 2 different game functions. One is a time-based game where you move a weight to one point to the other. And then another is a free play mode where you can do whatever you want for as long as you want.
We basically put the free play mode in because we couldn't beat the time game mode. So that's how it worked. Alright, so block diagrams. The hardware, you can see we use actually 4 timer counters. 3 of them are used for pulse width modulated signals that go to the 3 servos. And then the 4th timer counter we use as the watchdog timer because the actual watchdog timer in the Xilinx didn't have the capability of setting exactly 30 seconds, which is what we wanted to use for our game. So we just use a timer and load it with 30 seconds and count it down. And then we have the LCD that reads like the current state of the game that you're in, if you won, if you lost, yada yada. And the software flow, you boot up the program, it begins, it reads the buttons and switches to determine if you start off in free play mode or if you go into the time game mode. And if you flip switch to 0, it goes into time mode, loads the timer, and it reads the buttons and switches, it generates your servo signals, and it continues to read your buttons and switches until the interrupt occurs. And once you're in timed mode, the only way to get out of time mode is to restart, which is switch 7. And free play mode, you read the buttons and switches, generate your servo signals, and you get to play forever.
So for the game, the design overview, the game included both free play and time mode. The time mode utilizes a countdown using the timer, and we loaded it with 30 seconds. And after that 30 seconds, it displays you lose, and you're not allowed to operate the crane anymore unless you reset the time. Upon the startup, the LCD displays crane game version 1.02, and below that is the current state of the game. Free play mode, if you're in free play mode, it always says free play mode. If you're in the time mode, it says your timer started, so now you know you have 30 seconds to move that weight from the start to the finish. And then if you win, you flip another switch, switch 1, and it says congratulations. And if the time is over, it says you lose with the little sad face. That's pretty much it for the game. The servos were a bit more complicated. We had to use pulse width modulation to generate the signal that it takes. And in order to do that, you use your timer counters. The timer counters they use 2 timers, once for your pulse width and once for your period. And so the servos work a little weird. So when you have a 1.3 pulse, you have to have a 20 milliseconds. So we just added that time to the 20 millisecond time that we had, and that refreshes it every 20 milliseconds. So you get a smooth servo spin and not like a choppy one.
Yeah. So 1.3 millisecond pulse width spins it full speed one direction, 1.7 spins it full speed the other direction, and 1.5 holds it in the middle. So you can't just run nothing to it. It'll kind of like be choppy. You have to run a signal to it all the time. So even if you're not pushing a button, it still has to generate a signal to go to all the servos. And then testing, yeah, failed version. We were going to use, PMod makes a joystick, and it's a 2-axis joystick that has a couple buttons on it, and it uses the SPI interface to read in. And the problem we were having is it reads in 5 bytes, and if you push one of the buttons, it actually affected all 5 bytes. So we couldn't read in the X data, the Y data, and then our buttons without screwing something up. So we had to scrap that, which is why we used the buttons and switches on the board for it.
And the microcontroller was also really sensitive, and the data that they had on their data sheet online didn't exactly match what our joystick was doing. And if you moved it one direction and then you put it back in the center, so it's not moving in either direction, like the bits actually changed. So it's difficult to use.
Yeah. And then we had to verify that that we were generating the right signals with the oscilloscope. And then the servos all have a little calibrate thing because our 1.5 milliseconds isn't precisely 1.5, so you have to calibrate it for where it should be stopped. And then, yeah, we had to just make sure that our crane actually stands up and the crane doesn't like make it fall over or anything. So yeah, it all works. So that's
now the demo.
Demo. If everyone wants to come over here, I guess. So
the cable on here is just the weight down to give it a little counterweight to the weight of the crane and the servos.
yeah, and yeah. So upon startup, it says crane game version, and you're in free play mode right now. So you can move the crane around however you want, and then the switch 5 and 6 raise and lower the arm, and it's actually significantly harder to use than you would think. And yeah, so that's free play mode, and then you switch 0. It says timer started, so you have 30 seconds to move it around. Let's see if I can actually do this. I typically don't win actually at this. Let's see.
Oh, we were gonna use a magnet instead of a hook, but we got
But
the
we didn't
thinking,
know how
are
we
you
were
gonna drop it
a
at the
magnet.
end?
Yeah.
You can't unless it's like an electromagnet.
And then, so the timer hasn't ran out yet, so you switch 0, and I switched it too late.
And he still
So
lost.
it says.
So he barely.
So
lost.
it says you lose, and you can't move anything at all until you flip the last
switch
switch.
7.
So now you can move again. So it resets the whole game, and I can drag it back to the start. Yeah. So that's our project.
Yep.
Awesome.